Brothers and sisters, we are continuing our Bible study. Let us say a prayer together. Shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in us also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered all sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual way of life, both thinking and doing all those things that are pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and you're all holy. Talking about the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, we are at, and that is about the gathering demoniac. The demoniac was in the outside of Israel, on the other side of the shore, and we said yesterday that Christ went out of his comfort zone into, not his comfort zone really, but the comfort zone of the Israelite, into the other side, into the pagan territory, and performed a miracle where there was a lot of uncleanness. We identify three kinds of uncleanness. We identify the tombs that the demoniac lived in, and we identified the swine and the unclean spirits that were living inside of the person. And Christ basically pulled this man out of the tombs. That's where he lived. And it says literally that he came out of the tombs as if he was dead. We compared him to the prodigal son that lives within the uncleanness, who leaves his father's house and goes out and ends up living with the swine and eating with the swine. And that the father, when he comes back, the father says he was dead and now he's risen, he's alive. He was lost and he's found. And that the father himself goes out of his comfort zone, in a sense, goes out of the house into the horizon and meets him there. So these are all parallels between this story and the prodigal son. And that when he gets there, he brings him back to himself and he starts a party. In this story, Christ is met with a demoniac, and a demon start a conversation with him, which is not such a positive conversation. They start bargaining. Jesus, Son of Most High God, I implore you by God that you do not torment me. So the demon is speaking to Christ, and at first it says in the text that the demon comes and worships him. That is kind of a untruthful worship, so that we can see that it does not necessarily bring any fruits. We know that there are different kinds of worship. There's worship that is brought to God incorrectly. There is worship that is brought to false gods, and there's worship that is very shallow. There's worship that is very deep, based on discipleship. In this story, however, what we see is lack of discipleship, because as the demon worships Christ, then he starts bargaining with him, saying, what have I to do with you? In other words, we are separated. We are not connected. There's a distance between me and you, and I have nothing common with you. So, dear brothers and sisters, I want to bring your attention to the fact that our worship has one goal, that is bring ourselves into communion with Christ. And here we see a worship without communion, worship that is done in a perhaps in a artificial way, mocking way, where Christ is very far from the demons who do not want any communion with him, and in that sense they tell him there is nothing in common between them and Christ. So that is the meaning when we are finding something in common between us. So we share, we unite ourselves with Christ. Here we see the opposite, that the demons do not want to have true relationship with Christ. And uh, and then there's the concept of, why are you here? Are you trying to torture us? Don't torture us, and send us away into the swine. Then he asked him, what is your name? This is a very important question. What is your name? And this we meet several times throughout the Bible. The main importance of the name. We know that in Israel, name was a very sacred thing, that it identified the person, it created communion, relationship. It also, most importantly, gave power to the person who learned the name. And that is why when God created humanity, gave them a name. And that is why God asked Adam and Eve to name all the creation, all the creatures on the planet, and gave them authority over all creation. So name is a very important, it's basically our identity. And it, in a sense, describes who we are. And that's not accidental that we all have names, right? And when we meet someone, what's the first thing we share? Our name. We make our person because it, in a very slight sense, gives authority to the other person. Once they know our name, they know who we are, and that gives us more responsibility and more. It makes us more vulnerable. Basically, that's what I want to say. So Christ asks the demon what is his name, so that he can have full authority over him. He has authority, he already knows his name, but he wants to hear from the demon. There's also a difference between the number. The number, when the demon talks about itself, speaks in singular. Or why are you, whatever it is, then the answer was that the name is legion, which is the term comes from the Roman military, that means thousand, legion, and that's why we have then now, because there is we are many. Christ said, the demon says we are many. So first he saw the demon speaks in singular. Then when Christ asks the name, that's another trick that the demon tries to play. Then discovers for himself and for the people who are surrounding that there isn't only one demon, there's multiple demons in a person. So then that allows Christ to have a total cleansing of the person from all the demons that were in him. So the person was possessed by multiple demons, and also begged him. So once now he is being, the demon has, the tone of the relationship changes. Now the demon starts begging Christ to let them go into a place where they can find rest. So the demon says, and do not send them out of the country. So that Christ does not send them out of the country. This is a very interesting concept, where Christ speaks about the demons. When he heals the demoniac boy, he says to the father that when the demons come out of the boy, they will go into the desert place. They will wander everywhere. They will look for a place to dwell. But because they will not be able to find any place, they will return into the boy. And the later condition of the boy will be worse than the former condition, Christ says. Therefore, you need to set a guard to protect the child from the attack of the demons, because he says they will go out and gather with them. But what it teaches us is that the demons don't have anything to do outside in the wilderness, that their task is to possess humans, to interact with the humans and make them do things, or what is the most important thing, not necessarily that the humans will do something wrong or something bad. Not necessarily. What the demons try to do is to separate us from God. And that is what basically the task. The second task that they have is to separate us from one another, and that's those are the two most important concepts, because it is the most important commandment that was given by God to humanity. Love your neighbor as yourself and love God. Those two basic commandments need to remember are the most important things, and the task of the demons is to oppose to those commandments. And we know from the Garden of Eden that the demon was there, and the demon tried to reverse the commandment, or rather tricked humans to do the opposite of what the commandment was. And in this case, the first and most important commandment, the best commandment that we have received, is love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our entity, with our existence, with our life. Give our entire life to God. And the second one, Christ says, or the young man who Christ says, is like that, or Christ says to him, is like that: love your neighbor as yourself. So this is all about love. It's teaching us to love. Love, we know naturally, because we already love ourselves. It starts from self-love. And when we know how to love ourselves, we know what's best for us, then we can love others, then we can also love God. It is very important that we know that love, the most important love is for love for God, from the bottom up. It doesn't start from God. We love God and then we love our neighbor and our love ourselves. But we start with ourselves. We need to learn how to love ourselves. Then we will be able to love God. Then we can, we'll live. When we learn how to love ourselves, we'll learn how to love others. Then if we can manage loving our neighbor and our friends and our brothers, then we can love God. Because Christ says, if you see your brother and you cannot love them, don't fool me. Don't tell me that you could love God whom you don't see. So this is the basic concept. And the demon is here, and we see this is the first thing that we see in this story, is that by entering into this human being, the demon has been able to separate the human being from the rest of the humanity. And that's why he is dwelling in the tombs. So the two things are very important here. Number one is that he is cut off relationship with the other people. And when that happens to us, when we are not in relationship with one another, then the next step is we lose our relationship with God. It is very funny. Now we have to practice this social distancing thing for a good reason, to stay away from being infected. But it's what's wondrous to me is that everybody, if you go to the internet, everybody is looking for a way, like I have done, through Facebook, through live streaming, through YouTube, through Instagram, and all means, all the digital world that is available to us is making it possible for us to practice this social distancing, in a sense, in a very social way, so that we can communicate with each other. We will stay human while we're fighting a common enemy. Then as that happens, then we can come back together in a real communion, real community, one-on-one or in groups, or and have our social life back to ourselves. And that's what this demoniac is missing. Unfortunately, they didn't have technology at that time. They didn't have this living in the tombs and being separated from the rest of the humanity. That also brings him in separation from God. So when we see the process here, we'll realize that by restoring, by cleansing this person, Christ actually restores him to himself. He restores his relationship. We have a job, we have a family, this and that, but those are just beginning of the real good life. And from a place where the prodigal son was feeding and living with the pigs, all the way to the house, living in a house is a process, but it also not and ends in itself. The relationship between the Son and the Father is the most important thing. And when the Son returns, that relationship is restored. Everything else is a side effect. It comes with the in the package. When the relationship is restored with the Father, then everything else falls in its place. And here Christ does the exact the same thing. He cleanses the boy first, the man first, and then what we see is he gives them permission, the demons, to go away because it's not time for them to be tormented yet. And that's another concept that we need to look at, that there is a time frame set for the devil, that they will eventually be eliminated from the existence or whatever God's plan is. I don't want to mess with that. I'm not a specialist in that. But there was a time frame, and the demons knew that, and they kind of were caught off guard, and they were saying to Christ, "Is that time come yet already? We're kind of caught off guard." So Christ lets them go into the pigs, and the pigs go down the steep and into the sea, and they die. So what it says also here, that there's a parallel again between the pigs and the human being. The human being was almost in the same condition as the pigs were, being possessed by the demons, and also shows that when the demons are inside of the creature, then death is imminent. That there is like with the person living in the tombs, he was kind of associating himself with the dead. In this case, also, when the demons enter into the pigs, they also die. And so death is the result of sin. Sin, then death follows that. So that's how the sin and death are related to each other. And death is not necessarily a physical death. We're talking about death in general. Christ speaks about those about when someone comes and asks him to go bury their parents. He says, "Let the dead bury their dead." In other words, there are and then we have the resurrection of Christ, by Christ, with Christ, through Christ. And however, there is also another kind of death, that when we are separated from the source of life. So when you have an oxygen mask, let's say, and your life depends on that, and that hoses that bring the oxygen are shut off or turned off or cut off, then you're lacking the oxygen that gives you life, and then you die. So the same way, our relationship with God is kind of feeding us that essential necessity of a life, of existence. And then when that relationship is cut off, then we kind of wither like a plant. We exist, the branches, the dry branches are sticking out. You can see it's a tree, but it's not a living tree. You can't have any fruits out of it. So the essential concept of living is to bring fruits. And in this case, when a person lives with the demons and in the tombs and among the pigs, there are no fruits and there is no life in him, as we can see. I remember there's a beautiful book called My Grandfather's Blessings by Naomi. I forget the last name. And she says she goes to visit this very depressed woman, whatever, and there's a phrase there that the psychologist uses. She says, when I looked into her eyes were as gray as the fall outside, and it was disconnected. So through this depression, through the distress that this human being had gone through, her eyes had become glossy, like they were dead. She was sitting in a wheelchair or a chair and looking outside, and the psychiatrist says, and she was looking to nothing, into nothingness. So there was really no communication edges with him. And then she helps her, and what happens in the story eventually is that she hears or reads in the newspaper that this woman had started to be involved with local charity organizations and working, helping others. So that's what life was, relationship with others, where she had, through depression, cut herself off relationship and got stuck in her own house and inside of herself. So that's where the condition of this man is, and that helps us to realize the importance of Christian community, common and unity. We hold everything in common, and we're in unity and in communion with one another. But that also extends to being in communion with God. What happens in Christian communities, however, sometimes that our relationships start and end among ourselves. So we relate to one another, but we don't go to the next level, which is to relate to God, so that our relationships between us, among us, becomes authentic and strong, and our relationship with God. So when everybody's in the relationship with God, then the relationship with one another becomes very strong. And that is what gives life to Christian communities. And then when you are in that authentic relationship with one another and with God, then life flows out of your community into the world. And that's where Christ says that you can't hide your light, because you are in relationship with the source of light, and that light penetrates inside of you, and you start glowing with the same light that Christ has at the transfiguration. He became human, so we become divine, meaning that we receive that divine light in us, and we start glowing with the same light that God is, and that flows into other people and brings them into communion with us, because they desire that loving communion, and also into communion with God, because they see that the light comes from God, and then they start, as the phrase says, Christ says, and they will glorify your Father who is in heaven when they see your light, because the light, source of light, is God Himself. So I want to finish here. We're about 25 minutes. If you have any questions, please email me. You probably received my email, or you can go through Facebook and ask questions from there. You can also go to our website, which is doormissionchurch.org, and you can send me questions from there. Then I will base my Bible studies also on those questions that you have. Pretty soon, I'm planning to start Bible study through Zoom, so we can actually see each other. And if you have questions, you can actually ask through the screen, through the medium of the computers. So God bless you. Let us finish in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. May God bless you and keep you at peace. Be in touch. If you are part of our community, you know how to connect. If you are not, you can go through different ways of connecting. I am available for everyone, whoever needs anything, advice, assistance, whatever. Our community is also willing and able to create ways of finding ways of supporting those in need. Please let me know. God bless you, and see you later.